I'm Andrea Foote. Welcome to the Legal Change Agents podcast.
Tessa, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's all about change in the legal system. I'm so delighted you've taken this time to spend with me. I know you're a very busy person in your role. Can I ask you to start off with, what do you do and for whom?
Thank you, Andrea. I'm delighted to spend my afternoon with you, so thank you for the invitation. I ostensibly am a people enabler, I think, in all ways and shapes and forms. I feel like that's my role in my job at Moores as the CEO. I feel like it's ostensibly my role as a mother of 3 little active spirits as well. And just in life, really, I love people. I love all things about the human condition and behaviours and our motivations and our purpose, why we're here, and finding that, I think. And certainly at Moores, I feel like this great privilege of having found something where there's this coalescence of people and purpose. And we're actually, as a community, having a positive impact on the organisations and the individuals that we're serving. So
that's amazing. I'm very struck by your, would that be a byline, here for good? I thought that was a very powerful, I love a multi-layered message.
Yes.
So I found that a very interesting indicator of Moore's intent. And perhaps we'll think about that as we go on. So how did you end up sitting in the seat? What's been your journey to CEO-ness?
It's a good question. I was raised by a migrant sailor and a social worker. So kind of in Fitzroy in Melbourne, which once we migrated from Holland, which is back then it was a pretty, as they would say in the 80s, bohemian upbringing. And I think social justice and having an impact, or this sort of having a responsibility to serve, was something, and to give back was something that was one of the core values in my family. So I think it was almost predestined that I would become a lawyer of some sort, shape or form. I remember, when I was 5 and 6, when I grew up, I really wanted to be a lolly shop owner.
Oh.
And then, of course, as you do, because that's all you can think about at that age. Yeah. And then when I sort of got over that hump of, that age of reason, I think when I was probably 7, I remember articulating that I wanted to become a judge. Now, whether that probably says a lot about me being, eldest born, a Leo, very much. I'm also half Dutch. So for those of us that are close to any other Dutchies, they're pretty well known for their forthrightness and enjoying being right, shall we say. So all of this paints a picture as to what was driving me at that age. And then I spent the rest of my sort of schooling life and professional life trying to find how I could best have an impact, I think. It was very much a community service focus, a justice focus, fairness focus, and that then landed me in, would you believe, a top-tier law firm.
In Australia. Yeah.
Yes.
In Melbourne.
Yes.
Yeah.
Originally in Canberra, actually, in our nation's capital, and I became a public law litigator.
Yeah.
Was doing all sorts of state government litigation, particularly in immigration, and I sort of just found my niche to the extent that I really could hold on to any sort of sense of purpose in doing the pro bono work at this law firm.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my into human rights and a justice practice, which is what I did for a very long time. I became a human rights litigator, discrimination litigator, and public law generally. I moved from this big law firm to lead the litigation practice at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, which was a dream job at the time. I ended up staying there for more than a decade, in part because I absolutely loved what I was doing, but it was also a perfect place for me to balance parenthood and having 3 children across the space of that time. And then somebody that I'd worked with who I had an enormous amount of respect for, I'd worked with her at the Commission. She was at Moores as a partner. And she'd been whispering in my ear for a few years, you should come. And I was like, I'm never, ever going back to private practice. And she said, I promise you it's different. You know, it's not to say it's utopia, but it is a different way of doing law. Way that is purposeful and purpose-led. And over the space of many dinners and courtings over a number of years, I finally decided to take the leap, and I've not looked back since. Found my happy place, Andrew.
And it's never, it's never well. It's, I don't know, maybe it isn't, or it's never sort of A to B. It's
absolutely
a curving path when we learn.
A long and winding road.
A long and winding road. We should write a song about that.
We could.
And you talk about the organisation with Moores. I don't know Moores in great detail, but my recollection is they made some very strong choices about how they work with their clients around pricing. It feels like a long time ago. Have I got that right?
Yes, yep. So my predecessor and the leadership of Moores about 13 years ago took what then was a very courageous decision to introduce values-based pricing as the pricing model. So we exclusively value price. Which is to say that we have eschewed time-based billing entirely. There are no timesheets, there's no clock watching, there's none of that. We really just focus on creating value, obviously, for our clients. But it is very much a focus on outcomes rather than the inputs being time, for example. So it's been revolutionary, I think, but also has been always a real manifestation of the values of the firm. It's just another way that we articulate how we do things at Moores and that we do them differently.
So that already places you in an organisation in the legal industry. Timesheets, one of the big, I don't know what the word is, ruminations is, at what point will the timesheet end, as if it's insurmountable. And you must have been through that cycle of a bigger firm, and I'm sure they were timesheet based in some regard. Maybe in-house, maybe not, maybe with the group you were with, terrible brain.
No, you're right. So, we didn't have them in-house. And look, I've said publicly before that I feel like a bit of a big law refugee. That's what I refer to myself as, that. And quite frankly, and I'm not a psychologist, so I say this loosely, but I did have a bit of PTSD about the time-based billing model, in that I walked away from that experience my whole kind of first 6 or 7 years of practicing law as really ascribing all of my value and my worth to 6-minute units. It very much came the focus. I was focusing on numbers and metrics, and quite frankly, not the right ones. It takes time and actually a mindset shift to unlearn that. And I think particularly as a woman, I think there's a PhD in this, Andrea, but when you're trying to do alternative pricing models as with that gendered lens of a propensity to kind of undersell yourself, undervalue yourself, and always cut oneself a bit short.
It pokes a very powerful emotional response.
Yes.
I hadn't thought of it like that. That's really interesting. But that I'm always curious about the language of law. You know, I'm an escaped lawyer. I haven't heard big law refugee before, but I appreciate what you're saying. And some of this feeds into this area of my curiosity and I'm sure, about what law firms. If I think back in my history, and I've worked around law firms for 4 decades now, my God, or more, can't remember. The theme has always been law firms need to change because technology, or or society, or gender, or and yet they are resistant to change as a sort of given. It's like a straight line. So if you're in an interesting, you've had an interesting career journey, you're in an interesting organization in its own right, because it took a decision some time ago that must have shifted the feeling of the place. If you were to look out in the industry now, is there one thing that you would say that, let's pick on law firms because the ecosystem's a bit big. What do you think in general law firms could change to help make them resilient for the future?
So at a high level, I would say genuinely being human-centric. So that is the lens through which you assess, evaluate, make decisions. And that's never to say that you don't keep in mind sustainability, profitability, being commercial. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, it's easy to say people over profit, and I believe in that. But I think there's a way to hold both of those in balance. And in fact, you should, because if you're not profitable, you can't look after your people. You can't reinvest in your people, right? So it is a necessary kind of ecosystem. That's one thing. It's the way that we practice, in that we put our clients at the heart of everything that we do. So we are client-centric. We are people-centric in the sense that we understand that if we don't invest in our people, and I mean that very broadly, that term invest, it's in their development, their growth, their own capabilities, their skills, their behaviours, their mindsets, their feeling liberated and free to bring their whole selves to work in a way that's appropriate, of course. Feeling like they are enabled and in an environment that enables them to kind of bring their best. That is how we do things, and our pricing model is the same. So that's at a very kind of high level. I would say from a structural perspective, one of the things that our ecosystem could do that would have revolutionary change would be to get rid of time-based billing. It is one of the biggest structural barriers, I think, to an engaged and evolved system.
Yeah. So if this has been talked about, so why doesn't it shift? Why is that wage fist impotently at the world? I think that's really, it sits in it, because it's why I was so pleased when you said yes to this conversation, because you are in an organisation that took a decision that even now feels revolutionary.
Yeah,
13 years ago.
Yeah, look, I'm lucky in that I inherited that. I didn't have to pioneer it, lucky me. Yeah. But we've certainly worked with that. And yeah, what can I say? I feel like I'm sitting at not the top of the hill, like we're certainly still climbing, but I do feel like I look around at everybody else in the ecosystem and I want to say, look at what we're doing here. Like I'm not suggesting you can have it all, but this is a different way of doing things that actually preserves, I think, the humanity in what we're doing. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are law firms in business?
Yeah. Why did you start in the first place? Why did you become that whole? It's always a question I'm, very interested to hear from people of that opening question of so why after the sweet shop choice, then you're like lolly shop, judge, which I feel is probably about siblings, and then that's really. Isn't it interesting? It's something that's so very pragmatic, and yet I think it speaks to, I suspect that, oh gosh, so interesting, Tessa. The thing about that feeling, the big law refugee feeling of the timesheet, the means of production, the effect it's having in the legal industry. I've been reading the VLSBC, Victorian Legal Service Board and Commissioner, snappy title, their wellbeing report.
Yes.
There are real issues in the industry of profound unhappiness that can make it an unlovely place to work. So this isn't tweaking it. This is not a small thing. And it feels like in your organization, it's made a leap that's helped the people. That's not a question. It's more of a rumination, I think.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. And it's fascinating. I've spoken to a number of people and at conferences about particularly, whether things like generative AI is a threat to the billable hour, for example. And I sort of sit there, not too smug, but just a little bit, saying we are so well primed, like we have a foundation of a billing model and a way of being that actually can, rather than see new technologies as a threat, they are genuinely a real opportunity for us in a way that it's not threatening our business model. We're not worried that our clients are going to come to us and say, hang on a minute, you used to charge me 3 days worth of time for this output, and now you're using Gen AI tools and you're producing the same output within the space of half an hour. Where's the differential in pricing and cost for me, the client? Whereas for us, our system actually rewards efficiency. Like it incentivizes working smarter, not harder, because time is not an input. We are literally just focusing on how to create the best outcome for our client in the most effective and efficient way. So bring on the efficiencies, bring on the enabling technologies, like bring it on.
We're ready for it. So are you, maybe this is are law firms are an obvious statement made up of people, partnerships. I'm not quite, don't know what your organizational structure is, but broadly partnerships are very people centric organizations. What does it mean for how the lawyers in your organization think about change? How about that?
It's a good question because our organisation is made up of perhaps 5, if not 6 generations. So we're multi-generational, we're multicultural, we're multi-gendered. I see, and we're also multi-practitioners in the sense that, yes, we have a large cohort of lawyers, And you've worked with lawyers and with law firms long enough, Andrea, to know that there are particular traits that we possess. There's particular ways that we've been conditioned as humans to think and to behave. And some of those behaviours and traits and quite frankly, skills that we are we're respected for, like a healthy skepticism, a pragmatism,
an attention to detail, exactly.
Reasoning, being quite black and white and clear, and avoiding ambiguity where we can. All those sorts of things, having to know the answer. Those sorts of things that probably don't make us very good spouses and partners at times do make us very good lawyers. I do think, though, that brings a level of kind of collective, not attitude to change, but just a collective response to change. I think there is a general resistance in humans generally, but it does feel more acute in a law firm environment. And I've wondered over time, and I'm observing this at the moment because we happen to be going through a large-scale digital transformation.
Okay.
Glad I said those words without having a visceral reaction, Andrea. So that's progress for me.
That's good.
I think I've wondered whether it was, the legal support professionals who are not legally trained and conditioned in the same way are showing or displaying less resistance to change. But I think it's very hard to make that distinction. So I don't think my hypothesis is right there. What I am noticing is obviously a different attitude and approach to change across the generations in our workforce. But I do think all of this data is somewhat skewed by our experience in a post-COVID world in Melbourne as well.
Yes.
We started 2022 and 2023 with just a flat level of exhaustion and change fatigue, frankly. So starting off that pace, it's kind of perhaps not fair to assess a Melbourne law firm, for example, or people that make up a Melbourne law firm as being necessarily indicative of where the industry is at.
Yeah.
But I do think it's decades long entrenched in our industry that there are particular expectations around the ways of working, and there are certainly, I think time-based billing is one of the structural barriers that makes change very difficult, and particularly this wholesale kind of change that is upon us with the introduction of generative AI and all other technology and tools. That is threatening.
I think that's very interesting. That this is, for me, this is a conversation about seeking nuance. People talk about change like it's a Lego brick. It's the yellow one or it's the blue one. All lawyers are resistant. I don't know. All clients are, price sensitive. All this, whatever. That aspect I think there's some interesting aspects to it, the things that you're raising, which are about the emotional outwash that doesn't get paid, that's hard to remember and pay attention to. I think that's a sort of, I think my observation on what you've offered, I hadn't really thought of it like that in this context. I have a curiosity, which is when you're recruiting new, and I know I'm focusing on the legal teams, lawyers, when they come to you, do you get some common responses, or what's their emotional kind of journey that they might go through as they adapt to the Moores way?
So interestingly, I've noticed in my time that anyone who comes to us as a junior lawyer, for example, so if this is their first or early kind of career experience, they adapt brilliantly and quickly, and they love it. For anyone that is later in their career and they've experienced a traditional law firm, shall we say, because we are not a traditional law firm, we definitely do things differently, that it is a harder adjustment and a longer adjustment too.
Yeah.
It's something that we are trying to recruit for, though, is that AQ, that adaptability quotient. It's sort of now IQ or intellect or your legal technical expertise and specialisation is almost like a hygiene factor. Like, we don't assume it, we ensure that it's there, though. And anyone that's coming to us has to be sure and be confident that that is there, because we will be looking for other things. For one, we're looking for values alignment, because we've worked incredibly hard to cultivate a particular culture, which is human-centric. And for that, you must be driven by, or motivated at least, by our shared purpose. Because if you're not, I mean, you might not as well be there. Yeah, really.
It's not going to fit that, and it's going to stand out. The culture people will stand out quite dramatically.
Yeah, and they'll just self-select out for the main, really. But that doesn't happen very often, because we do try and uncover those sorts of things in our recruitment processes. This is a bit of an unusual practice, but I sit on, I would say, 80 to 90% of our recruitment, not to make the decision, but really just to proffer to prospective candidates as well. Like, I want you to feel like someone that you can align with, you're inspired by, or you want to work with. Like, I am somebody who they would see as a values-aligned leader. Because if they don't feel that, they're not really going to feel that invested and connected to what it is and who we are as an organisation, because I try very hard to live our values. So and that's something that's really important to me, that we make sure that there is that alignment, because we all know what happens when there are bad eggs, and that it can be quite damaging to culture. We invest a lot in that front end piece of recruitment.
That is, and what I'm getting is a sense of an organisation that has, for whatever reason, a decade or more ago, took a fundamental strategic choice that has then let the firm start to make adaptations, and the focus on the human centricity, which sounds like it should be obvious, but it's a real struggle, I think, in quite a lot of not just law firms, entities, organisations. The fact that it doesn't sound like lip service, it feels like a living thing. And obviously client centricity is, it puts you in a very interesting position as a leader. And you're a CEO. Are you fee earning as well at the same time?
No.
So, okay. So that's also, so what I'm mindful of time, and these things always disappear like water. For me, what I've gained is really like a a fascinating insight into a law firm that has made a big choice and that has got to a point where, as circumstances are now changing, are starting to be able to approach it rather than hide from that thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we've got the right foundations structurally, culturally, to be able to shift or tweak the mindset to set us up to evolve in a way that's not as confronting as it might be for others in other law firm environments. I should be honest and say it's not easy, though, Andrea.
And I think this is the it's not that there's a magic. I was listening. That what I can imagine is the steps to the first decision, the fundamental shift, getting to that point with a group of owners must have been a big thing. I mean, it feels like there's a paper in this anyway somewhere. But what I am curious, what I'm grateful for that you've joined this conversation is that you said it. We said it earlier when we were talking before. The role of leader can be very lonely, and that's it. That doesn't matter whether you're a managing partner or CEO of whatever, some big entity. And so just hearing from people out in the field and their experiences is incredibly, incredibly important. So I wonder if there's, just as we come to a close, is there a point in your career, maybe you've touched on it already, that really kind of shaped you as the idea of being a person who welcomes change?
Without it sounding trite, I started as CEO of Moores, and my first CEO appointment on the 1st of March 2020, which for anyone that is in Melbourne, they will be acutely aware that that was 2 weeks before any announcement of a particular state of pandemic that we might have been in.
Yes.
And it absolutely transformed the way that we work practically, in that prior to this point, for the most part, the entire legal industry, when you said you worked flexibly, it might mean that you left at 6:30 p.m. to get home in time to have dinner with your family. That's flexible work. So that whole way of working, in a physical sense, in a geographical sense, shifted by necessity. And that was in and of itself revolutionary for us. And it was revolutionary for me personally, with 3 little people at home taking on a CEO role for the first time. That was undoubtedly a big turning point for me. And I mean, I do have a natural aversion to change, and I'm noticing about myself that as I approach midlife, that it's getting further and further entrenched. And so I'm grateful that I'm paying attention to it. That's all I can say. I'm not saying I can turn off the tap of resistance, but what I can say is that I'm developing an awareness and insight to pay attention to that resistance when it's there and unpack it. I am also surrounded by a younger generation in the workforce. I'm surrounded by an even younger generation in my home, who are, my greatest teachers in life on so many fronts. But their capacity for change and resilience is beyond anything that I can even aspire to be honest. They've grown up in a world of constant change and evolution. And so it is actually just part of their lives, and it's that expectation, whereas I think we had a different upbringing. I mean, I'm about to turn 45, and in the last 45 years, I mean, you could almost count on one or two hands the enormous scale of large global events that impacted me, my life, not me, to be honest.
Yeah.
Whereas they're living through very different times.
Yeah. It's the thing I was just sitting with is how quickly we forget. The big thing happens and then it rolls on, and it feels like it's not happened. But the aspect of human centricity, the impact of organizations, the PTSD from being in a law firm, the backwash of this has an impact on people. And listening to the generational aspects, it's very easy to live in the now and assume that this is what it's like. I think what I've heard from you, Tessa, is that there is a role in certain law firms for somebody who is alert to how they feel about this change. I think that's a huge step. But if there's a learning for anyone listening, it's know thyself first. So that idea of noticing, I'm noticing that when somebody offers me the new pen, and I think, well, I prefer my 1mm Bics. Don't give me that. Very precise. That's the first step to going, oh, I wonder what's happening there. So I'm now overwhelmed with with many directions, but we're coming to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I hope that our listeners value your insights and your expertise and your learnings and your generosity in sharing it with them. So thank you for joining me.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.